fantastic to be here, and I'm excited to welcome award-winning actor, philanthropist, and best-selling author of multiple books, including The Wealth Cure, Hill Harper. Welcome.
Hey Kai, how are you? Hey everybody, great to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's get started. Would love to start with just what has driven your interest and focus on economic empowerment. Tell us your journey and about the efforts that you're leading.
Well, I'll tell you, a few years ago, I was working with my foundation, the Manifest Your Destiny Foundation, and as we started to do more and more development work with marginalized communities and young people from challenged backgrounds and areas, and the whole purpose of my foundation was to help young people manifest their destiny, just like it sounds. And as you would assume, Kai, many of much of the impediments to me being able to help them were economic. Fundamentally speaking, you cannot have social justice without economic justice. And so I ended up writing the book, The Wealth Cure, which is a book about money and putting money in its place and figuring out how money could be used as a tool for empowerment, but also how money has been used, obviously, as a tool of exploitation and marginalization. And so as I started digging deeper into those issues, something very clear started to come up, and that was blockchain technology and decentralization and money policy and all of the things that we can sort of dig deeper into. But we started to realize that there was a clear connective tissue between the opportunities of decentralization and blockchain technology that are offered and dealing with marginalization, exploitation, poverty, and folks being left behind and left out. And so I started, I guess, we all know what it means to start going down a rabbit's hole, because this truly is a rabbit's hole when you talk about blockchain technology. So I started going in and digging deeper, and met some amazing people along the way, people who want to see the world improve, get better, become more equitable. And in so doing, I've continued work in this space. And I really, truly am encouraged by all of the people, many of whom are on, I'm sure, here, that are interested in blockchain technology as a tool for social good and for social equity. Kai, did I blow you away so much with that answer that you were silenced and you were just you were mesmerized into silence? It's amazing.
Exactly. I want to go back to in your book, you actually talk about, use an analogy of money is like energy. And so how do you think about that in the context of crypto and kind of redefining what money means and kind of this distinction between money and wealth? How does that kind of come together with crypto?
That's a great question. And so money as energy exists on many different levels. On the most rudimentary level, everybody on here knows that if you got some cash in your pocket, you just bounce a little bit better. I mean, you got a little bit more energy. You're bouncing. You got a knot in your pocket or in your purse. It just feels good. And part of the reason why we talk about mattress economies is that in many ways the most marginalized communities are under an unbanked but have cash in their mattress or on their possession or somewhere, because cash gives us a sense of security in a way, right? It provides some measure of energy back to you. But on a bigger or higher plane, when I talk about money as energy, it's money is an energy from the relationship we have with money. And we have to always talk about money as a tool, because money is not, the interesting thing, I talk about the new cool money rule, which refers to this money energy ideas. And the purpose of money is not to spend it, but rather collect it so you gain access to cheaper and cheaper money. And so when you talk about money as energy, you say cheaper and cheaper money. What do you mean, Hill? And what I talk about is the difference between smart money and dumb money. And most of us have been taught that a dollar's a dollar, and that's it, in other words, but it's just not true. It's a big lie. The idea there's smart money and then there's dumb money. And smart money is simply the use of this store of value that you can use to actually free up more of your time. What do I mean by that? The idea is the more money you collect or the cheaper the money is, the less time it takes or less energy it takes out of you to actually earn that dollar. And so smart money is money, for instance, when your head hits the pillow, by the time you wake up the next morning, do you have more of it or at least equal? And then dumb money is money that you have significantly less by the time you wake up the next day. Things that you paid for instance, in a high interest credit card, or using the actual dollar bill. Why? Because of inflation. So that dollar fiat currency that you have every time we go to bed at night is worth less and less and less. And that's why cryptocurrency and the opportunities that holds for us fight against that inflationary piece, because inflation is one of the number one things that have been used against poor people to keep poor people poor. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that wealthy people, wealthy communities tend to have the best relationships with banks, and banks, certainly central banks, control monetary policy. And therefore, the policies that are being created are to benefit the people with whom they have relationships. And those policies, by just, for instance, what we've done recently in this country, printed more and more and more and more money. What is that doing? It's making poor people poorer, because everything is costing more. And when you have less of that dollar and things cost more money is actually being extricated from your community and from your family, etc. We can get deeper into why cryptocurrencies fight against that. But money is energy simply goes back to the idea of how much energy from your life is required to actually access that dollar. And can you set your life up in a way, or in certain ways, and certainly we can, such that the money is cheaper to you. It's less expensive in terms of your time and energy.
And so that's, you've had this experience that many of us have had in crypto, going down the rabbit hole and just starting to learn and understand it. And I'm curious, as you started to learn about crypto, what have you found as the barriers and the impediments for more people in underrepresented communities to learn about it, to be able to access it and interact with it, and kind of what needs to be done to help overcome those?
Well, that's a great question. And what we start to realize is that even in the crypto space, that folks are trying to replicate the same barriers to entry that have been created in the fiat space. And what do I mean by that? Ownership of exchanges is one example, right? So Brian Armstrong, Coinbase; Jack Dorsey, Cash App; the Winklevi, Gemini. Now, all three of those individuals are extremely wealthy. And most of the so-called Bitcoin whales are wealthy individuals. And so there's an argument out there that people say, well, Hill, how are we decentralizing things if we're just seeing a replication of the same demographic and dynamic in terms of holders of these assets in the space? And the opportunity is there, but we cannot allow the same replication of barriers to entry to exist. And that's the key. That is the key. And so I like to actually refer back to history and try to look at examples of where we've seen people of color, marginalized communities actually be extremely disruptive and break the cycle. Certainly one of the worst data points that breaks my heart to even say what I'm about to say is that in 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, Black people in America owned a little less than 1% of America's wealth. In January 2021, the day before we inaugurate a new president of the country, Black people in America own a little less than 1% of America's wealth. So you could say, well, so how could that be with so many star athletes and entertainers and a president for 8 years and folks who own businesses and people on boards and all of this success? It can be because systemic racism and institutionalized, deeply institutionalized racism and barriers to entry exist, such that on a macro level, communities have not been able to break through. Now, if we allow the same thing to happen with blockchain technology, whether it comes from the regulations, regulatory side, or just all of the tech impediments. So let's look at places where we've seen disruption. One of the best examples in America was Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Greenwood District. And we're coming up on the centennial of Black Wall Street, May 31st, 2021. It'll be the 100-year anniversary of the greatest race riot in the history of this country, where 300 African Americans were massacred and killed. Another 800 were put in internment camps. They were buried in mass graves. And the first time the American citizens were bombed from the air was not Pearl Harbor or 9/11. It was Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the Oklahoma National Guard dropped Molotov cocktails on 1,200 Black-owned businesses and homes to destroy and loot and rob this community. So what does that mean? It means that this community had actually created an amazing amount of wealth and success. It meant that they had already done that. And so what did they use? And Kyle, break down 3 pillars that I think are important that we have to learn for, as far as the blockchain technology is concerned. 3 pillars: 1, institutional ownership; 2, institutional trust; and 3, the flow or movement of money. So institutional ownership piece, in Black Wall Street in Tulsa, you had Black-owned banks, Black-owned insurance companies, Black barbers, Black butchers. And then you had this trust of the community of those institutions, that they weren't predatory, that they weren't trying to rip them off or take advantage or squeeze as much money out of the community as possible. And number 3, you had the flow of money. A dollar within Black Wall Street changed hands 30 to 60 times before it left the ecosystem. It created a vortex of wealth generation. We can actually replicate those 3 exact same pillars within technology. And that's what I'm working on doing. Specifically, so that we don't see just a replication in the crypto space that we see in the fiat space.
It's super powerful. And I think, there's, when a lot of people think about, crypto, they start to think about and go to financial inclusion, and just from a payments perspective, and how you can transfer value or help people who are underbanked, but really shifting the conversation to financial empowerment. How do you build wealth, and how do you use blockchain technology as a way that it can be a platform for entrepreneurship? So we'd love to hear more about kind of what you're working on with the foundation, and kind of where you're heading in terms of how to address these really important issues that you just highlighted.
Okay. First of all, we have to remember that foundational financial empowerment of communities is a critical piece for solving many of the social ills that we want to solve. We understand that there's an inextricable link between poverty and low performing schools. We understand that there's an inextricable link between poverty and incarceration rates in communities. We understand that there's an inextricable link between poverty, marginalization, and health outcomes, whether it's COVID outcomes or high blood pressure, heart disease, and all of those negative outcomes. So almost any social ill that we want to solve, we can deal with through monetary policy in some way, shape, or form, foundationally speaking. And so what I'm working on, and we'll be launching within the next 3 months actually, is a platform and ecosystem that, for better or for worse, is similar to what I just talked about around the Black Wall Street. The idea that we will be able to understand how powerful our spend is, and how we're actually voting every time we spend $1. And most of us don't understand that if we actually collectively work together around our spend, that we can not only impact policy, but we can also create wealth at the same time. And we can do that in a low barrier to entry way through technology, by creating the ecosystem and creating the community. And obviously, it takes some measure of financial literacy and financial education, and then adoption of these principles to get people to acting in line to understand their power. Because at the end of the day, there's power in collecting your dollar. I remember early in my acting career, I lived in a neighborhood. I was doing theater in New York, but then I got this little gig in LA, and I went out there and I didn't know anybody and I had no money at all. And so I was living in a neighborhood that was a lot of gangs. It was a Black and Latino neighborhood, and I got my little room, and I was making it, and I realized that upstairs lived this amazing group of multiple Latino families, and none of them individually could afford a car, but every month they pooled their money and got enough for a used car, and one got one month, another got one month, another got one month. And in a different tradition, that's called a susu. I'm not building a susu, so to speak, because those are kind of, people have different feelings about those and they're pyramid schemes or whatever. But the point is it reinforces the power of collective spend. And collective spend can work in a very low barrier to entry way through blockchain technology and through a tech platform. And so I'm building that platform, and I'm excited to welcome people in. We should be launching in the next 3 months.
That's super exciting. Definitely can't wait to hear more and to continue the discussion on the panel. But just wanted to thank you for all of the work that you're doing, and appreciate you taking the time to come and share your wisdom with everyone else.
I'm not going to let you off that easy. Kai, I can't let you off that easy, because there'd be people out there side-eyeing me if I didn't speak up about this. So I got to ask you a tough question.
Oh,
you
man.
Ready?
All right.
So you work with Visa. Now, it's not, I think that credit card companies have not been known to be the best stewards for challenged communities when it comes to running up debt, when it comes to having people get caught up. I think that the data suggests that the average household in America is carrying somewhere around $13,000 to $14,000 in credit card debt, and most people are just paying their minimums month to month to month. Now, what could the MasterCards of the world and the Visas of the world do to sort of help communities that are challenged, marginalized, and bear the brunt? Because the one thing we do know is that it's expensive to be poor. Meaning, if you're poor, you pay higher interest rates on your credit cards, on your car note, on this and on that. You'd think it'd be the opposite. You'd be like, yeah, the poor folks who have less to spend should be paying less interest rates. But what can the credit folks, and I know you're an amazing sponsor and you weren't even expecting me to do this, but I got to keep my own credibility. I got to ask you these questions. What can credit card companies do to step up and help marginalized communities around debt?
So I think kind of first, Visa is a payments technology company that has been facilitating commerce for about 6 decades. But we think it's absolutely critical that we are embedding diversity and inclusion into the new products that we build to make sure that they can serve underrepresented communities. And so we are I'm spending my time right now really looking at what are the opportunities that new technologies really create, and how can we empower diverse entrepreneurs to be able to build new financial services for their communities. And I think for them to be able to do that, they need to have trusted brands and global infrastructure that they can build on top of. And so we think that there's a huge role that we should play to help with that.
I love that. And I think that there's going to be a wonderful role for Visa on my platform. So we got to talk.
Excited to continue the conversation, but I'll pass it back to you, Cleb.